Good morning, everyone. I'm Don Bautista, the Executive Director of AC Friendship Society. We assist the public in completing legal forms. Every day, our client intake crew receive calls from British Columbians, and what we have noticed in the last 2 months is an increasing level of stress from our callers. And so we decided that maybe it's time to do a series to just allow the different heads of justice and institutions to talk directly to them. The reason we wanted to do that is because our leaders tend to be unseen and unheard. And so this is an opportunity for them to speak directly to you, unfiltered. There are 3 things we're going to try and do today with our guests. The first is to allow them to inform you, the public, of their planning and the thinking behind their planning. Secondly is to tell you how they're working on to even the playing field. And third, to share their reflections on what they are learning now that might be important to continue once you get past the pandemic. Our guest today is Craig Ferris, QC, who is the president of the Law Society. He plays a significant role in ensuring that the access to justice continues to operate regardless of circumstances. We're happy to have him today. He will tell us what the mission of the Law Society is and the things that they are doing to get us through. Good morning, Craig.
Morning, Dom.
Now, before I ask you my 4 questions, I'd like to invite you to address the public and tell them what's on your mind.
Thank you, Dom, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to the public here today. As the president of the Law Society, we try to run a social media and other media feeds, but not always quite sure how deeply we're getting into the public. And so the opportunity to do this today is very much appreciated. So just to start from sort of ground one about what the Law Society is. The Law Society is thought to be by most simply the regulator of lawyers. And we do perform that function. Our function is to make sure that lawyers are competent, that they're serving the public, and that they act with integrity. But our mandate that's found in a piece of legislation called the Legal Professions Act in British Columbia is broader. And one of the mandates that we have is to protect the rights and freedoms of all British Columbians. And that's a very broad mandate, and we at the Law Society take it very seriously. And so what does that mean for us? It means that though we are the lawyers are a self-regulated profession, which means that lawyers generally govern lawyers. We don't do that because lawyers want to be a club. We do that because in order to serve the public, lawyers need to be independent of government. They need to be able to challenge governmental authority without fear of reprisal. And that's really why we have self-governance. But I think with self-governance comes a responsibility to make sure that we're not acting in lawyers' interests, we're acting in the public interest. And that's what I said to our bencher table the first meeting of this year. And that's what I said to our newly elected bencher, Cheryl Disa, this week, that you need to take off your lawyer hat and put on your public interest hat. And lawyers' interests are one of the public interests, but they're certainly not our sole job. And if we simply act for lawyers, then we're not doing what we need to do. And I've used the term bencher, and it's a bit of a funny word, and I can explain the history of it, but that's really the governors of the Law Society, the people who set the policy for the organization. It's a historic word, and as we all know, lawyers sometimes use funny words, and that's one of them.
Okay. So, please continue.
That's sort of our goal and our mission, and I'll just say a couple of other things. What will be of interest, I think, to your viewership is starting last year when I was one of the vice presidents, I put in place we call our Futures Committee, which is going to report back hopefully this summer, if not then early this fall. And that's really to look at legal profession, legal services, legal market, access to legal services over the next 3 to 5 years and how that market and situation is changing, and what we can do as regulators to accelerate and innovate and to ensure that we have changes that service the public. We started with what I think is shocking to people when you actually look at it, is how many people go without access to legal service providers or legal information when they're dealing with a legal problem. And I think there's no way anyone objective could ever look at that mountain of evidence and say that we don't have a problem. And so that is the core of what we're looking at, is how do we solve that problem and what we can do as a regulator in our sphere to make sure that that problem is addressed.
Thank you. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about access to legal service shortly. But let me ask you my first question. It's been 2 months. I have to say that I wanted to acknowledge the hard work that your staff have put on behind the scenes to move heaven and earth to get things done so the business continues, so to speak. And so that does not go unnoticed for people like me. It mattered to me to see that. And you're almost 3 or 4 p.m. Blasts as part of my week. And thank you for doing that. I know it must have been very challenging. Now, 2 months is a short time, and yet there's been a lot of things that you worked on. What lessons do you take from these things? What have you learned?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that we've learned. And, you know, let's just take a step back to March when this all happened. And I thank you for acknowledging the staff of the Law Society, because the operations of the Law Society were moved online and remote within days. And it was really quite an incredible job that was done by all of those people. And while I get to talk about it and I help in planning it, it's really those people who are doing the nuts and bolts of it. And, you know, they've just done a tremendous job to make sure that we continue to function. But as you went through this situation, which hopefully we're coming out of in some form now, you know, there was an initial phase where you were plugging holes. And so the first thing that lesson tells me is that the system, and I use the system broadly, the Law Society is one element of sort of the justice system in British Columbia. But the system needs to be more resilient going forward. And by resilient, you know, I don't really mean tougher, I mean just less holes. What you found is that the reliance on paper, the in-person swearing of oaths, the ability to witness signatures, to have to mail in forms when there's nobody there to accept those forms. All of those procedures that you know work and that we've relied on for many years are not very resilient when you enter into a pandemic. And frankly, it allows you to sort of, you know, reassert and re-question whether those are necessary. And so we had started last year at the Law Society trying to, you know, move away from a lot of paper-based and dealing with our member services and designing some web-based materials so that we could do away with that. But what this has done is shown us that, you know, this isn't a 3 or 4 year project. This is a 3 or 4 month project. That systems need to be accelerated and innovation needs to be accelerated to make sure that we can operate if we all have to lock down again in 3 or 4 months. Well, I hope we don't have to, but we need to be able to flip a switch and be able to do that. And so I think that, and I've touched on this, the other thing that we've learned is a lot of the innovation that we've talked about for a number of years is accelerating. And so, you know, I'm sure that your viewership has heard, you know, remote swearing of affidavits. I don't think that that's ever going away. There's now remote execution of wills. I'm not sure that that's ever going away. We've moved at the Law Society for one of the functions that we have is that we regulate the conduct of lawyers, and I suspect we'll talk about that a bit, but we actually hold hearings and we have our own tribunal to sanction lawyers who've acted improperly. You know, we held this week our first online hearing. We've moved to transmittal of hearing materials through a web-based portal, as opposed to me getting a big box of documents every couple of weeks. And so all of those innovations to try to make sure the system is working are accelerating, and a lot of those accelerated changes will stay in place. And then I'll just say this third point, which is that one of the very key elements of all of this is that it has demonstrated, for those of us who have access to the system and understand the system, the real harm of the justice system not being there for you. And again, I'm using that broadly, and I'm not being critical of anybody within the system, because the court services branch, the chief justices have been amazing in what they've tried to do. But we've not innovated enough. We've not created a situation where we can ensure access. And that's a lesson to us all. And it's a lesson to us all looking forward, that we need to solve the problem for those people who in the past haven't had access, because we now know what it feels like. And it's not a good feeling. And we need to try to make sure that the system is available to everyone.
This time last week, at about close to, I'd say about 8 o'clock, our services were running over time. And I know of at least maybe 3 clients we were helping that night who we told them, look, your affidavit, courts are closed anyway. Why don't we just finish it up, and we'll wait till the courts reopen. I can tell you it was very difficult, a conversation that each of our volunteers had to make, because the only question in the minds of the client was, when will it open? Why can't I have this sworn? So I can tell you the palpable sense of powerlessness is apparent. And I suspect that tonight, when we help the clients again, is we will go through the same conversation. So please keep that in mind, sort of moving forward. Being powerless is just a difficult feeling.
So through the course of the pandemic, I've had a series of conversations with all 3 chief justices, Chief Judge Gillespie, Chief Justice Bowman, and Chief Justice Hinkson. I've been dealing with the Attorney General. My staff has been dealing with the staff at the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General Richard Fife. And I think everyone recognizes that a closure, however small and for however long, of the court system is a real problem. The court system, justice system, is a pillar of our constitutional form of government. People need to be able to access the court, and everyone has been working extremely hard to move the door open as much as possible, while keeping people safe. It takes me back to my point, which is there's been a lot of talk over the years about accelerating some innovation and change, which would have made all of these systems more resilient. But it hasn't been on the front burner. It hasn't been something that has been funded fully. And if things are working, they tend to keep working. And this is what's really been demonstrated now, is that we need to have a plan and systems in place that this just doesn't happen again, because the people that you're trying to have those affidavits sworn for, they shouldn't be in that situation.
Thank you. I'm heartened by your response. Let me move on to my second question. This is centered around the public, and unlike those who can afford to hire counsel, most of the people we assist are not well versed in law nor their procedures. What are your thoughts with respect to taking advantage of the situation that we're in to try and accelerate some pieces that will help even the playing field? Right.
So that's a complicated sort of social question, Don, because on the one hand, well, let's start this way. Lawyers should never take advantage of people. And so to the extent that lawyers have acted in a way that their conduct is inappropriate, or they've not been truthful or forthright, we sanction lawyers. And so lawyers' conduct is governed by our system of rules, and we can discipline lawyers both for professional misconduct as well as for conduct in their private lives, conduct unbecoming. And so we take that obligation very seriously to ensure that we have a competent legal profession with integrity. Now, so if a lawyer has treated you incorrectly, let us know, and that's something that we can investigate and ultimately address. But you raise a more difficult issue, which is sort of the economic reality of the situation, where someone can afford legal advice and legal services, and it's like building a house without an engineer. It's hard to understand if you don't have the education to understand how the 2x4s go together. And so lawyers know that. And so one part of what you're talking about, I think, is not necessarily making the system equal for everyone in it, but it's making sure that the people who are coming and using your services have the ability to get information and some advice to make sure that they have their own independent view of how the system should operate. And so I come back to the Futures Committee, but I'll also mention two other things. When I started my year as president this year in 2020, I issued mandate letters to all my committees. One of the committees was a committee we call Unauthorized Practice, which has the obligation to ensure that people who shouldn't be practicing law don't. Now, that's not always a black and white question. And there are certain situations where people are providing legal advice in situations where it's not in the public interest to say that they shouldn't be doing that. And so what I've asked that committee to do is to draft up a policy so everyone is very, very clear about situations where people can be giving advice and legal help who are not lawyers to people that need it. And I think that that's a line which in other jurisdictions has started to move further and further away. And I'm hopeful that my committee will come back this fall with a line that provides ample room for people to provide advice. There's lots of situations where it's just not cost effective to hire a lawyer, but there's people who could provide you with some advice, residential tenancy matters, some administrative some immigration matters. All of those situations, people should have advice and should be able to get it, and they shouldn't be closed from doing it. So I'm hopeful that that will progress this fall. The other one I know is one of your favorite topics, which is our licensed paralegal task force. And so I'll take the knife. We've been far too long in dealing with this issue. A couple of years ago, we thought we had progressed. Our members voted against it. I think that was because we hadn't done a good enough job, myself included, in educating our members as to what we were trying to accomplish. But I told that committee, that task force, that I want a final report this fall. So I want us to move forward on that because, again, there should be a greater segment of people who can provide advice and information to people so they do have a level playing field and they're not trying to build a house on their own, and they have a fair chance of asserting their legal rights in a way that is meaningful, because that's, it's a foundational element of our society.
Thank you, Craig. You don't have to take the knife. I think the knife can be shared by all your predecessors, because when we talk about paralegals, as you know, studies after studies have been going on since the 1980s. So 40 years is a long time. And pardon me, and respectfully, I've always found it difficult that another study was created. If you're saying to me, this is it, this is the final study of all studies, okay, maybe you're going to make me smile a little bit, just a little bit, because it's long overdue. So thank you for acknowledging that. Let me move on to my third question. You've used the word accelerated several times this morning. Now, this pandemic has presented all of us opportunities, including the Law Society. Can you tell our viewers sort of what potential bold moves you will lead the Law Society into committing in the months ahead?
Yeah, so let's just sort of talk through some subject matter. And I mentioned this before. Our hearing process, the remote hearing process, our conduct review process, which is now being conducted remotely, I don't think there's any going back on that. There'll always be a segment of hearings that require in-person matters if they're, highly witness driven, etc. But I think for a great number of matters, the use of video technology will be permanent, and that will be a savings. And again, we're always cognizant of our fees and how much we're charging members, because that has an effect on access to justice. So I think that's permanent. The second item, which we haven't talked about, is we train lawyers. So lawyers come out of law school, they do a year of articling, which is an apprenticeship program. And as part of that, they take a professional legal training course program, which is skills-based, to try to help them learn how to draft contracts, how to interview people, and sort of more practical skills. And so that course moved online. And so that's a great example of something that which we had never, there was a great resistance to having online learning in that scenario. But we've been forced to doing it, and now we've got this incubation period of this testing and how well it works. And I think the hope is that will become permanent, and it will reduce the amount of time that people need to come and spend in larger centers to attend this course, which is a 10-week course. But if you think of the savings to people and how much easier it would be people to become a lawyer if you only had to come to one of those centers for maybe 5 days on 2 or 3 occasions, and you could live in your home community. You wouldn't have to have the added expense of coming to Vancouver, and we could also likely offer it cheaper remotely. There's some savings there as well. So I think that will become permanent. And I think a lot of the ways that we do forms, etc., will become permanent. So the Law Society operations, I think, will be greatly changed. For the broader justice system, I think, again, a lot of the changes that you're seeing right now will become permanent. The way courts are operating, greater use of in-writing hearings, greater use of video hearings. I always think that the most valuable resource that the court system has is access to a judge in a courtroom in person, and that we should treat that as valuable resource and use it when necessary. But perhaps there are situations where it's not necessary, and I know the courts are looking at that. But I think all of this technological innovation, more service providers, less interface personally with people through the use of technology, I think all of that is going to become permanent. And I think we're going to come out of this with a pretty different looking legal profession and legal system. And I just want to add one thing, and that is that this has been a tough time economically for a lot of people, lawyers included. And I know that sometimes lawyers get a bit of a reputation for not, but a lot of lawyers operate on the margins. They're not high income earners. And one of my real goals here is to make sure that we don't come out of this pandemic with less legal service providers, less people who help those on the margins than we have right now. And so the last thing that we're going to do, I think, is we're really going to work hard just to try to put in place some form of fee program to help these people sort of get over the hump over the next 6 to 18 months, to make sure that we don't lose people from the profession who generally are people that are helping people on the margins.
Thank you for that. And of course, it's quite telling that the legal service providers that you just alluded to presently is one group, the members of the Law Society. And every opportunity I get, I like to say that perhaps part of sort of the huge leap that the Law Society has looked to doing in the previous years is expanding who gets to practice and deliver legal services in our province. So I will be keeping a close watch, and I'm sure you appreciate why. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is what took place in 2010. Chief Justice McLaughlin, as she was then, happened to be in Vancouver and spoke at the dialogue in SFU. And it is where she basically said access to legal services is a basic human right, including your average middle income Canadian. What is the position of the Law Society with respect to that? And to be more precise, many of the legal service institutions that deliver this type of help to the public continue to institute income tests, where we know that even the average Canadian can't afford a lawyer.
So I don't know if we have a position right on the question of whether it's defined as a basic human right from the law side, but I can tell you that I think that everybody should have the right to legal advice. And as I said on our futures committee, we started with the looking at unmet legal need, and it's for those anybody listening who think it's just marginal populations who don't have access to legal services. Well, I can tell you you're wrong. Legal services, it's to a very high income level that you'll find people that don't have access to legal services due to cost or other reasons. And so I think that has to change. And the change comes this isn't a simple question. There's been far greater minds than mine thinking about it for a long period of time. But I sort of go back to basic economic principles that one, you need to make the processes hopefully simpler and more efficient, so there just isn't as much cost. And you get this push-pull in that process through the use of technology and trying to make things more efficient. We all thought that reviewing documents and litigation was going to get so much simpler and cheaper because we had all this technology. But what it's done is it's created. Sorry about that. It's created a technological nightmare in the sense that there's now millions and millions of documents in small cases, and that creates cost and inefficiency. So we need to look at how we streamline procedures to make things less costly, so disputes can be heard in an easier way. But on the other side is the supply side, and we need to make sure there's more people available who can get paid for helping people. Mm-hmm. And I tell this to lawyers all the time who sort of think about these issues. It's we're not doing this work right now. We're not fighting some of these bylaw enforcements. We're not fighting these residential matters. We're not appearing in these tribunals. So why wouldn't we let somebody else do it? It's not going to affect us. It's actually going to make things better. Because I can tell you, I've experienced as a lawyer, sometimes dealing with people who are self-represented is difficult. And there's nothing better than they say, oh, I've spoken to somebody, and generally that sort of moves you onto a plane that you can actually speak about the same issues, as opposed to, having to talk people through, well, I understand that that's a problem for you, but it's actually not it's not really relevant to what we're talking about here. And so, the more people can get some advice and some information, the quicker and the better the system will work. And that will help. So I think we need to look at it from both sides, the efficiency of the process side and the supply of who can provide some legal services.
Well, in the days to come, I imagine more retired lawyers will be called up to render service because that's available now. And I certainly hope that the Law Society would consider allowing retired lawyers to be accessed by groups like me who can't, because we, on principle, deliver services regardless of means. We don't discriminate against middle-income Canadians, rich clients, or poor. And so I'm sort of just putting it out there that, it's something to consider.
Well, I can tell you, Dom, that the retired lawyers are certainly able to provide pro bono services as long as they pay their sort of retired lawyer fee, which is negligible. So that those services should be available to you. And I just want to correct one thing that you said. Lawyers are not the only legal service providers. We also have notaries. And so quite often when I'm talking with people about, will, whether or not it's appropriate to have a paralegal do something, I say, well, have you used a notary? Because a notary is in many ways a different category of legal service provider, and most people have had good experiences with them. And so when you say that, they start to understand that we could have some different categories of people providing some advice in a competent way, which is helpful to the public. And so I really hope to progress that issue this year.
To my final question, Craig, lawyers are very powerful insiders. The Law Society of BC refers to them as members. Other places call them, like in Ontario, they're called licensees. Words matter, and when I think about that, and when I think about how the Law Society publishes notices to the profession, when it very well, the contents of it very well benefits the public as well, it's hard to sort of not come to the conclusion that the lawyers are in front. And yet, I still remember you. One of those times a couple of years ago when you were looking at client identification, and you came up to me and said, Don, I think you should think about taking a position on behalf of your clients and what client identification is, how it's going to be impacted with the new rules. I know you have them at heart. I wanted to give you an opportunity to address these things in front of our audience.
So thank you, Don. So I wanted to start with what you said about us calling lawyers members, because there's a debate, and we may change that for exactly the reason that you suggested. But I'll tell you why that word means something to me. When I meet articling students, I ask them not to refer to the Law Society as them, to refer to it as us, because it is us. We are all in this as a self-governing profession, and with you being a member comes the responsibility on each and every lawyer in this province, as well as on the Law Society, to make sure that the system works for everyone, that we all have a public interest mandate to make sure that in our practices that we are helping the public and making sure that we're offering competent services, but also making sure people have access. And so I like the word member because it says to me that we have a collective responsibility to make the system work. Now, I understand what you say, that and I think it's where I started, which is people will look at this and say, well, lawyers governing lawyers, that's pretty clubby. And that's really where I start as a bencher. And if benchers get it wrong, then they're not fulfilling their function, and somebody will tell us we're getting it wrong. But I have taken it to heart in my now almost 7 years as a bencher that I'm not there for lawyers. And I tell lawyers that every day, that the job one is to take off your lawyer hat and put on your public interest hat. The system has to work for everyone, not just you, not just us, but everyone. And that every day at the Law Society, we work to progress that goal. And there's wonderful people. We do a lot of policy work. We try to drive positive change. We only have so many tools in our toolbox, but that doesn't mean we can't ask other people to use their tools to make change. And so I can say here today that I'm committed to that change, and that I'm trying to, in my public interest hat, push it forward, because people should get legal advice. It helps. I think, we saw that with the legal aid debate, that every dollar that you put into legal aid gets multiplied many times throughout the society, the economy, as to benefits that other people receive. And so, the people that you help, if you were able to have help them with the forms and shuffle them along to a lawyer who could spend a few minutes with them at the end of the hallway, wouldn't that be a fantastic thing? Or a paralegal, or somebody who could phone up somebody and say, I'm representing somebody. Wouldn't that just be great? We would save society unknown costs, help people, and it would be a win-win for everyone.
So, unlike lawyers who belong to bar associations and so on, the public does not have an association. They're individuals. How do they reach the Law Society? How do they reach you? how do they connect with you to tell you what's on their minds? Because I'm pretty sure you're kind of like, you can only take so much of me.
All of my contact information is on the website. All of the Law Society's contact information is on the website. Phone calls, emails, and people will get back to you with your issues or try to stream you into talking to the correct person that you should be, because we've got lots of different departments of the Law Society, and your question may deal with one or the other. But I think so that's really about our functions and our what we're doing right now. But I do think that you raise a broader issue, which is how do we as acting in the public interest, how do we connect with people who want to tell us about their experiences and their stories and ask us to help. And that's difficult. The Law Society has been around for well over 100 years, and trying to make sure that an organization like that is out and listening to the public when much of the public probably doesn't have much of a sense of our identity or what we do is difficult. So I had hoped this year to go around the province a little bit, to try to get into some public meetings, to try to create a dialogue, to raise the profile of the Law Society, to make sure that we're getting those responses. It's obviously not possible right now. I'm still hopeful that it will be possible, but we're trying to engage that dialogue. We're trying to ensure that people have access to us either through social media or through just email communication, and to make sure that people know that we're here to assist and to think about their issues, which is really what we do a lot of. We think about policy and how we can make the system better, and those ideas can come from anywhere.
I think I felt bad when I read that part that you really couldn't do your roadshow, because the last time there was a roadshow was when the Law Society turned 125 and Gord Turf went around the province.
Right.
It's been such a long time, Mr. President, and I'm sorry. As you well know, every presidency seems to be, there's always some issue they did not plan for when they sort of took office. We have a big one on your hands, a pandemic. I want to give you the opportunity to address our viewers for the last time. If there's anything else you wanted to say, please.
Yeah, so I'll just say this. We are here to help. You should never see us as the problem. We're working to solve problems, and we're open, and we're ready and to listen to you. And like I said, my contact information is on the website. If you Google Craig Ferris lawyer, I'm the first one that comes up, and I'm happy to hear your concerns and to take them forward to the appropriate people. We are here to govern legal services in the public interest and to try to make the system work in that way. And I think we have a unique opportunity right now because there's lots of people listening, and a lot of people who have seen the problems that the pandemic have created are eager to try and make changes to the system that will make it more resilient, more accessible, and better for us all. So I think we should take this opportunity and try to do that. And lots of good people in the courts, in the Attorney General's ministry, lots of good people are thinking about these things. And so I do think it's a unique opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President Ferris. I know you have a benchers meeting to get ready for on Friday. On that note, please send my very warm regards to your colleagues. I know the people in the Law Society, many of whom are my friends, have been working long hours just to get it going. And it's not lost on us, as I said, and we are grateful. Please tell them to be safe and take care.
Thank you for the opportunity, Don.
All right, goodbye.